Welcome to a Wednesday edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Basketball Podcast. We are in week 4 of the regular season. Nick Whalen, Brandon Kravitz here with you as we are every Wednesday. And Brandon, what a night we had in I believe, night 3 of the NBA in-season tournament. I am still kind of scrambling, trying to find, okay, which teams are still in play right now for the NBA Cup. I believe the Clippers were mathematically eliminated last night with their loss to the Denver Nuggets. But an exciting night of group play. We had, one big kerfuffle going on in the Timberwolves-Warriors game. Less than 2 minutes in, Klay Thompson gets kicked out. Draymond Green comes in for the headlock on Rudy Gobert. He gets ejected as well. Anthony Davis was nearly ejected in the Lakers game. I mean, we wondered if players would take the in-season cup seriously, and I think we have our answer, Brandon.
The only people that are laughing at this right now are trolling fans. It's honestly been a lot of fun. And I don't know if you saw Steph Curry's response when he was asked, how confusing is all of this? And he just kind of snarkily goes, if you just read about it, it's really not that difficult. You're in a group stage, you try and pick up enough wins to advance, and then it's a knockout tournament, and it really is. I mean, when you break it down, this is not that complicated. And these players, first of all, there's money on the line, $500,000 at the end for the champion. Even if it's just 5% more interesting and competitive than a basic Tuesday or Friday night game in the NBA, isn't that all you're kind of asking for?
Yeah.
And so when you change the color of the courts and the jerseys are different, and you tell the players, even if it's sort of like this pot of gold, or maybe bronze would be a better comparison, a pot of bronze at the end of the rainbow, the players, we dog these guys way too much as NBA fans, and saying that they don't care. There's so many guys that care so much, that are uber competitive, and they only need a little morsel of added motivation to give us what we saw last night. Full-blown choke. I don't know how much motivation Draymond Green needs to choke somebody out, but I mean, this has been obviously a victory early on for the NBA is my overarching point.
Do you really think the in-season tournament is what provoked this increased level of aggression, I guess, to put it professionally last night? I think that was going to happen no matter what. I don't think, Anthony Davis said, hey, it's the in-season tournament. I gotta shove Santi Aldama here. Or, I don't think Klay Thompson said, man, 2 minutes into the in-season tournament, game 2, look, I got to turn it up a notch. I think it just happened to be that these were in-season tournament games. But either way, it's in general good for the league. I think Adam Silver would probably tell you, no, it's not good that we have players getting kicked out. But I think the fact that this happened to occur during an in-season tournament night, it shines more light on it.
I don't think that they fought because they're in the in-season tournament. My general point is just that players are way more naturally competitive than I think we tend to give them credit for. And that's where the in-season tournament can be something that these players care about, because they already have that. And it's that sort of just natural competitiveness that they're going to get into scuffles throughout the course of seasons. And Draymond Green has done this to teammates in practice, so we shouldn't be surprised that it's happening on a Tuesday night against an opponent. But I think that you are seeing an increased level of competitiveness in general. The aggression, probably not because of in-season tournament play, but just overall, we've seen close games. We've seen good games. I think we read the stat on last week's podcast that first night of in-season tournament action saw more one-score games than we'd seen in years on a slate that had at least 7 games. So there's clearly something to this.
All right, let's hit some of the news coming out of yesterday and looking ahead to the rest of the week. And we'll start with Golden State. And, they were going to be without Steph Curry no matter what last night. And Draymond has a history of, if he's not playing with Curry, he just doesn't want to be out there. So I'm not shocked that he got kicked out of this game. Less than 2 minutes in, I would have gone over on that. But nonetheless, they're calling Curry, calling this a minor injury, but they're also calling it a right knee sprain, which I don't know, man. Those are kind of contradictory to me, right? And Curry was on the bench, he was up, and didn't look like he was hampered at all. It didn't appear to be wearing any brace or anything on that knee. So I'm inclined to believe the Warriors here that this is not that big of a deal. But we're also talking about a guy in his mid-30s who's missed a ton of time with a variety of injuries over the last several years. And I don't know, man, like in general, like knee sprain is not just like a 1 to 2 game injury. Like that's usually something that keeps guys out for weeks, if not longer. So are you concerned right now about Steph Curry? Like, do you expect to see him tomorrow against OKC, Saturday in the rematch against OKC? Like, how are we handling this right now for fantasy?
So the report is that it's not that serious of an injury right now. To me, that means no more than a week. But yeah, I expect him to miss the next couple of games. And I see here on our itinerary teams that we got wrong. This is one that's on the opposite end for me. And there are plenty. Don't worry, we'll put plenty of egg on my face. But we talked about it on the first podcast we did together. I was concerned about this Warriors team getting old right in front of our very eyes. And then they started the season pretty hot, and it wasn't looking great at first, trying to end the dynasty verbally here on the podcast for the Golden State Warriors. But we are seeing it. Klay Thompson wasn't the same player last year. Steph Curry now dealing with injuries, and if he's out, that's going to crater the productivity of this team. They go as he goes, and if he's not out on the floor, I don't think Chris Paul is going to keep them afloat.
Kind of some bizarre possessions, I thought, by Chris Paul down the stretch. I mean, it ended up being a really competitive game against Minnesota. And we'll talk about Brandin Podziemski in a moment here. But even after the ejections, you're thinking, okay, all right, Minnesota's going to run away with this thing. They still have Gobert. They got Towns. They got Edwards. And that wasn't really the case. They were actually trailing going into the fourth quarter. Got some big stops. Anthony Edwards hit a big pull-up three late in the game. But I thought Chris Paul had several opportunities to, I don't know if I would say take over this game, but at least kind of take control of the offense. And he was passing on like wide open mid-range jumpers and, kind of kicking it out to guys who you maybe don't necessarily want taking big shots down the stretch. I thought it was kind of a bizarrely passive game for Chris Paul, considering the Warriors did not have Draymond, Curry, or Klay Thompson for virtually the entire game. But the thing with the Warriors right now, Brandon, is they're just not shooting the ball well, right? And obviously when you remove Curry from the equation, that's going to make it even more difficult. But they're under 35% from three as a team on the season. They're 44.5% from the field. That's 26th in the NBA. The only teams worse than the Warriors so far are the Bulls, the Blazers, the Grizzlies, and the Knicks. And part of that is Andrew Wiggins just looking like a shell of himself. Obviously you're not relying heavily on Draymond Green to give you anything offensively. Chris Paul's been up and down. But there's always this, fabled belief that like, all right, this is the year. Jonathan Kuminga, Moses Moody, those guys are going to take over. It feels like we're going down the same path with those guys again. And, now we have Brandin Podziemski, who looks like he might be at least something for this team off the bench. But I also don't think you can count on him, going 9 of 18 from the field, banking in a three at the end of the third quarter. I mean, that felt like, kind of one of those like magical, like almost Jeremy Lin type of games. And, I think they'll experiment and see what they have with him. But ultimately, they flashed a graphic last night, Brandon, that I did not realize this. Brandin Podziemski became only the second Warriors player to score over 20 points this season. Obviously, Steph Curry is the other one. And Dario Saric ended up getting over 20 points as well. He had a late three-pointer. So the Warriors now have 3 20-point scorers on the year: Steph Curry, Brandin Podziemski, and Dario Saric.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I think that we oftentimes are fooled by jerseys in sports, and don't let the jersey fool you in this situation. Just because you're donning the Warriors garb doesn't mean that you're all of a sudden a proficient three-point shooter. Klay Thompson has dropped off a bit. I mean, he was still a great three-point shooter last year, so I don't want to dog him too much. But like you said, you're not getting much from Draymond Green. When you take Steph Curry out of the equation, who do you love in terms of outside shooting on this team? A team that for the last decade has been excellent at that and almost clean across the board with guys that they would bring in and shuffle into their lineup. That's just not there. Those young guys have not come around. And, hey, maybe this Podziemski fella is somebody that we should take a good hard look at, because they're going to need production if Steph Curry ends up missing some time here. And he 23 points, and it's not like he was doing it all on fluky threes. 9 of 18 from the field, so six of his shots came from inside the perimeter. I like that in terms of just his ability to score at multiple levels. This is a first-round pick. He was a top 20 guy, and not highly heralded coming out of college, but clearly something that Steve Kerr and company saw in him.
Wisconsin native Brandin Podziemski.
Oh, there you go. What else do you need to know?
I think Andrew Wiggins' struggles to me are maybe the biggest concern so far. Like I think Klay's going to get going. We saw a slow start from him last year. Draymond, like the numbers are never going to look great, but obviously what he gives them is tough to quantify, and I think he's going to be fine. But Wiggins is 5 for 33 from three to begin the season. And he just doesn't look confident, man. He doesn't look engaged. He's just kind of floating around out there. We saw that again last night. Had some lapses on the defensive end. Like, it's just, I don't know what's going on with Wiggins. Like, we're 12 games in at this point. If it was 3, 4, 5 games, you're like, all right, could just be a slump. But he looks like he's lost confidence across the board. Like, he's at 50% from the free throw line. He's at 39% from the field. Like, it's not like it's just a 3-pointers issue. Like, he's not hitting anything right now, and he's not even taking that many. And last night was kind of one of those spots where it's like, all right, you're down your 3 best players for the entire game. Like, this would be the night for Andrew Wiggins to step up, and he just simply did not. And it's gotten to the point where, if you're in a 10 or a 12 team league, I don't think I'm dropping Andrew Wiggins because I think the pedigree's there, and I do think over the course of the season he's somebody that you want to roster. But if you have anything less than a 4-game week right now, it's like I don't even know if I want to start Andrew Wiggins.
No, I mean, and there's a number of these guys. I'm sure that at some point, Jordan Poole is one of the most confounding players in fantasy. His name will probably come up at some point. Andrew Wiggins fits into the same bucket of the lead boot players on your roster that are too good to drop and too bad to start. And we end up with a lot of these players. I don't understand what's happening. This guy's put on a lot of muscle over the last several years, and I think he's somebody that should be attacking the basket a lot more. But when you look, forget about the free throw percentage, which is certainly not great at less than 50%. He's not even getting to the line, Nick. That's part of the problem. Well, I mean, maybe he wouldn't make him if he got there, but I mean, he shot no free throws last night, 4 in the 2 games combined prior to that. This is a guy that should be getting to the cup and forcing the issue with his physicality, and he's not doing that at all. So you're right, and I think that speaks to a confidence issue when you're passively just taking ill-advised mid-range or 3-point shots, and they're not falling. The best players, when that's happening and their field goal percentage or 3-point percentage is sluggish, they attack the rim, especially if they have the ability to do it. He does, and he's not doing it. So it does speak to that confidence issue. And that's where it's tough to gauge because, I mean, confidence is everything in basketball, and you have no idea as a fantasy manager when that's ever going to come back.
Got a question about Jaren Jackson Jr. from our friend Mal, and this will kind of lead us to talking about Grizzlies-Lakers, and the Grizzlies are certainly a team that I got wrong. I wouldn't say I thought they were going to win the West or anything like that. I did not think they'd be 2-9, Brandon.
Same
with the worst record in the Western Conference through 11 games, and they've even been competitive on a lot of nights, and they're down Steven Adams, they're down Ja Morant. We know that. I think those are kind of their own issues, but some of the depth that they lost as well. Tyus Jones, for example, like not having him to kind of cover up for the absence of Ja Morant, I think that's been a much bigger factor than we anticipated. They lost Marcus Smart to an injury last night. Looked like he rolled his ankle in the second quarter, so we'll see how much time he ends up missing. But this one against the Lakers got completely out of hand. I mean, this game was over essentially by halftime, and the Lakers, like LeBron, Anthony Davis didn't even play at all in the fourth quarter. It was yet another night. Excuse me, my voice is just all over the place. It was another night where I feel like everybody in my most important fantasy league started the night 0 for 5 from the field. Looking at you, Jaren Jackson, who is now down to like 44% on the year. He was 0 for 7 at one point, finished 3 of 16 from the floor. So the same thing happened with Lauri Markkanen. Damian Lillard is also on that team. He's shooting like 36% from the field on the year. I thought this would be a monster situation early on for Jaren Jackson, without Ja Morant. Coming off the Team USA, you're thinking, all right, it's going to be the Bane show. It's going to be the Jaren Jackson show every single night. And, Jaren Jackson has now had 3 straight games where he just hasn't really done anything offensively. The rebounds are not really there at all. He has not had multiple block shots in 5 straight games. That was one of my highest buys. This was an auction league. And it's looking, I wouldn't say like it's going to be a total bust because the big games have still been there. Like Jackson had a nice 3-game run at the beginning of November, but 2 of those games came against Portland, and it feels like when they go up against some of the elite teams in the league, they're just overmatched.
I mean, the Grizzlies make no sense right now, and perhaps it's just as simple as this. Sometimes, we think that when a great player leaves the floor, that it then opens up room, an opportunity for other really good players like Jaren Jackson Jr. But this is a big man that clearly needs his point guard to play that 2-man game. I don't think he's the same without Ja Morant. We saw spurts last season when Ja was off the floor where this team still played well, but that's where you get a team that's good, that's rolling. Go back to that confidence word that we were using before, that can rally the troops. There's no rallying right now. They know they're down a road where they had to play without Ja Morant, their best player, for 25 games. And it's just something that seems like nobody's stepping up and it's not clicking right now. But I would hold on Jaren Jackson Jr. If we're talking about between the two, just positionally, it's harder to replace Jaren Jackson Jr. You're already 11 games into the jawless Grizzlies. I think Jaren Jackson Jr., we just all read the situation wrong. We thought he'd be better without Ja. He clearly needs Ja in the lineup, and that's coming. You're a couple of weeks away from the Grizzlies returning to full form and strength.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you said it, that he kind of needs Ja Morant to function. He's not the type of guy who's going to just go get his own shot, right? I think
exactly.
It's kind of ironic watching him go up against Anthony Davis last night, and like Jaren Jackson last night looked like Anthony Davis on his bad nights, where he's kind of out of control. He's his legs are all over the place. He's like trying to draw contact, but it ends up just being messy, and he's forcing shots. Like that's kind of what it reminded me of. And it's those nights when the Lakers don't have LeBron, and it's like, all right, AD, we need you to give us 30. Sometimes he can do it. Sometimes he can't. And, I think more often than not, that's what we've seen with Jackson. We got a couple of questions, one here. Cade Cunningham, kind of in the same boat. Andrew asked the same thing. Is he a buy low? Mal asked if you should trade Cade Cunningham. I feel the same way on Cade as I do Jaren Jackson. I feel like we've seen the highs with Cade Cunningham. Last night was certainly not one of those games. But he ranks 75th right now in per game value in 8 category leagues. He still gave you 12 assists, gave you 3 steals last night. The shooting is what's kind of holding him back. And if you play in a 9-cat league, turnovers have been somewhat of an issue for him as well. But he's shooting 40.2% from the field, but he's at 88% from the line. 1.8 threes per game. I'd be looking to buy low on Cade Cunningham. Like if it's a do I try to trade him versus do I try to trade for him? I would rather buy low on Cade.
I agree. I still think his best days are in front of him. And I'd just like to reiterate in terms of the Jaren Jackson Jr. situation. I think at this point, I'd still rather have Jaren Jackson Jr. But if we're just isolating Cade Cunningham, a buy low, I would go ahead and see what you can pull off to get him. All eyes are on Assar Thompson right now. He is is this guy not the fantasy darling? Last week was all about Scotty Barnes and what he was doing for fantasy managers, but Assar Thompson is not going away. And so everybody that's got their eyes on the Pistons has their eyes firmly planted on him. But I think we live in a world where both of those guys can exist and have their own fantasy value on the same roster. They just do different things. Assar is bringing it across the board. The guy is statistically defense, offense, and everything. And Cade Cunningham is going to fill it up with more like points and assists.
Yeah, Assar Thompson is the auction buy or the draft pick of the year so far, and
probably,
I think he's benefiting from the absence of Jalen Duren in terms of the rebounds. Like I don't think he's going to be a 14 rebounds a game guy when Duren is back. But it's clear. I mean, he's going to stick in this rotation, right? It's like Jaden Ivey.
Oh, the defense is too good. You can't get away from him.
He's unbelievable on defense. Yeah, I mean, I feel like we didn't really get a fair chance to evaluate him, in the overtime league last year. But my goodness, I mean, this dude is unbelievable. It's like he's a great on-ball defender, and it's also translating to fantasy. Like that's not always the case, right? There's a lot of good defenders who just don't get a ton of steals or blocks, whereas Assar Thompson feels like he's good for at least one of each every night. I mean, these last 4 games, 12 points, 13 boards. He's given you almost 4 assists as well. That was not really something that we knew would be consistent coming in. 1.8 blocks, 1 steal. He's a top 50 guy on the year so far. Obviously, if you're someone who grabbed him late, you're holding on to him. We got a question about Herbert Jones. Is he a must roster over Tyus Jones? No relation. Or Bruce Brown? He's definitely a must roster for me. For sure over Bruce Brown. I mean, you could kind of quibble about Tyus Jones. Like I'm still holding out some hope there. He had 10 points, 8 assists the other night against Toronto. That was a step in the right direction, but the minutes have been all over the place. I would rather have Herb Jones right now of those 3. The question is, do they pull back on Herb Jones at some point? Like Trey Murphy could be back in the next couple of weeks. Obviously CJ McCollum is out. We don't really know when he's going to be back. Jose Alvarado, not 1-to-1 positionally. But I think Herb Jones is just such a good 3-and-D player, such a good defender that yes, Trey Murphy's going to cut into his workload, but I think New Orleans needs to keep him on the floor for at least 25 plus minutes a night. And if that's the case, he's still probably getting you 1 or 2 steals every night. He's going to get you some blocks as well. He had 7 combined steals and blocks in 31 minutes in what turned into a blowout last night against Dallas. So absolutely want him over Bruce Brown. And I think you got to take him over Tyus Jones too.
I think I'd rather have Tyus Jones if we're just talking about over the course of the season. But I agree. I mean, I really like Herb Jones, the player. The problem is that I don't think we have a true depiction of what this New Orleans Pelicans rotation is going to look like, because we just haven't seen them fully healthy at any point this season. So he's a player that I like, but the Washington Wizards have very few adults in the room. Tyus Jones feels like one of them. So even though the numbers aren't eye-popping, I just think over the course of the season, he's going to bring you more efficiency, a higher usage. They've got to get away from Jordan Poole. I'm probably not telling the Wizards anything that they can't figure out for themselves. And that is certainly one of my big swings and misses in the draft process.
Yeah. I was targeting Jordan Poole and didn't really get him anywhere. Kind of feels like a bullet dodged in that situation. And, just in the last week, there's been like multiple videos. Like somebody put together like a lowlights compilation of Jordan Poole, just doing Jordan Poole things. There's that video of him just like very clearly
not paying attention. Yeah.
Blowing off coaches, blowing off teammates in the huddle. It's like we're 3.5 weeks into the season. Don't really love that as far as what it means going forward, but
I wouldn't read into that if he didn't also play like someone that didn't pay attention in huddles.
Yeah,
that's the problem.
Yeah, let's talk about your team, the Orlando Magic. Last night they get blown out by Brooklyn, 124-104. It was still a decent night for Banchero and Franz Wagner. Goga Bitadze still starting, still giving you okay numbers in relief of Wendell Carter. Anything that you saw last night or over these last couple of games from Orlando? I know you follow them as closely as anybody.
Well, they cratered in the fourth quarter, which has been one of the biggest problems for this team. But, that's aside from the fantasy lens. I thought that we would see more from Anthony Black in terms of numbers. He wasn't a guy that I was high on in the fantasy draft process because I didn't think he would see minutes. But he's impressed the team so much in practice and in the preseason that when Markelle Fultz went down, they slid him right into the starting lineup. But man, does this guy fade into the background. I think he looks comfortable out there, but he just doesn't handle the ball all that often, and he is not he's a guy that to me passes the eye test, but then you look at the box score and he's giving you virtually nothing. So even with Markelle Fultz out of the lineup, I don't even think that Anthony Black is rosterable. Love what I've seen from Jalen Suggs on the offensive end last night. Was not one of those nights, and he's going to be hot and cold. That's just the kind of player that he is. But in terms of what he brings defensively, and when you get those random bursts on offense, I think Jalen Suggs is somebody that I probably should have been higher on in the draft process. Franz is Franz. He brings you this. Yeah, he's the same guy every single night. It's great. For Paolo, I think the shooting percentage will get there. One of the things that I'm noticing with him is that he has not figured out where his kill spot is yet. He doesn't know where to go on the floor to go, I need a bucket. I'm going to shoot it from here. This is still somebody that wants to be a good 3-point shooter. Last night he shot over 50% from the perimeter, but that's not who he is. I just don't think he's found his spot yet. Paolo is a perfect example of the type of player that's much better in real life than he is in fantasy. Definitely helps this team in the win-loss department, but he's just not somebody is he even a top 50 fantasy player at this point? So that's where I think fantasy and reality can definitely, there can be a divergence there.
Let's hit a couple quick questions from the chat here. Sochan or Bruce Brown in a 14-team, 9-category league? I would go Bruce Brown. I'm kind of out on this Sochan experiment, especially in 9-cat. You're dealing with the turnovers. That if you look at Sochan's ranking in 8-cat versus 9-cat, there's a pretty big difference. We're talking like 40, 50 spots because of the turnovers. Bruce Brown's been pretty underwhelming. He hasn't had any big stat lines, but that's also just who Bruce Brown is. He's a bit player. He's more valuable in real life than he is in fantasy. But I think in a 9-category league, Bruce Brown has a better chance to finish in that 90 to 110 range than Jeremy Sochan does at this point, especially if the Spurs move away from this point guard experiment at some point, right? It's the assists that are kind of buoying him right now. And I could see San Antonio wanting to go with a more traditional guard. They have Trey Jones just kind of sitting there. So I would lean Bruce Brown in that situation.
Yeah, we're starting to see his minutes dip a little bit too. I agree. I think it's something they go away from. He's not a great player, and this team just, man, when they play bad, it is like otherworldly bad. 87 points last night against the Oklahoma. They had 83 a couple of weeks ago against the Los Angeles Clippers. So they can crater in a way that I'm sort of at the point where I'm trying to avoid all Spurs not named Victor Wembanyama, just because I don't want the full blown dud. There's so many players in fantasy that can just give you night to night production, and there are so many guys on the Spurs that just give you nothing, and he's one of them.
So we talked about Jordan Poole. We won't go long on this one, but Guilford asks, any suggestions on what to do with this clown who ranks outside of the top 100 so far this season? I mean, he was I saw him going in the top 40, 38 to like 45 in a lot of drafts. Yeah, man. I mean, what are you doing? Like,
I was so high on him. I thought for sure the usage was going to skyrocket. It was going to be Jordan Poole ball. And yet here the Washington Wizards are trying to actually coach a basketball team. I thought it was just going to be sandlot ball.
This is dunks.
Yeah, pick up at the YMCA, and I mean he's trying to play his own brand of basketball. And credit to the Wizards, because they're not having it, and they shouldn't. Jordan Poole, we are learning, was a product of the system. And the system was in Golden State. And honestly, they need each other, because Golden State is struggling to score outside of the obvious stars. And Jordan Poole is struggling without real structure. He thinks he's a superstar. He is simply not. What do you do with him? You hold him, put him on your bench, and you can put him on the trade block. But who's making you an offer for Jordan Poole right now? And he's too good to drop.
Yeah, I feel like this is my like Alibaba stock that I bought in like 2019, and I'm just like waiting for it to eventually skyrocket. And I don't know if that's going to happen. And if that's the thing, is if you're trading him, I mean, it's rock bottom, it feels like right now. I would probably hold off and just hope that he has like a hot week, which will probably come at some point, right? I mean, there's going to be a week where he has back-to-back 30-point games. Maybe at that point, that's when you try to sell relatively high on him. But if you're selling him right now, I mean, what are you getting back? It's like, I'm looking at other players in his general range. It's like, are you trading him for, I don't know, Devin Vassell, or you try to get someone like Jeremy Grant, who has been a better scorer but is not really giving you anything else. You could target. Try to look at like other John Collins is like hanging around like the top 100. I mean, these are the type of guys we're talking. Like, you're not getting somebody else who is being drafted in that same range.
No, but I'm also. In most scenarios, I think philosophically in fantasy, I agree with you. You don't want to sell low, but it could actually get worse. So I don't think it's the worst idea to just see if you can get something. If there's some player out there that intrigues you, that's around the range that Nick was just talking about. In most scenarios, I would say that's a really bad idea, and it's a panic move. I truly think this situation might not improve itself. So if you have somebody, you have to know that other fantasy manager is looking and saying, I believe that turnaround is coming. And if you can get that sort of value on Jordan Poole, that might be the only value that's really left, is somebody that really thinks that, like, if they think they're ripping you off, then that might be the person you want to make a deal with.
All right. Good trade question here from Jacob. So he's saying Jason Tatum, Assar Thompson, and Jalen Duren for LeBron, Miles Turner, and Kristaps Porzingis in a points league. Which side would you rather have?
Tatum, Assar Thompson, and Duren for LeBron, Miles Turner, and Kristaps Porzingis. Boy, that is a heavy hitter blockbuster trade. I think I'd rather have the first part. I'm not trying to trade Assar Thompson right now. Tatum is great. Yeah. No, I think I'm keeping Tatum, Thompson, and Duren.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I'm on that side for sure. LeBron's been fantastic so far. It's just he looks like the same guy from the last few years, and you do wonder at some point, is he missing 15 to 20 games? Is that injury coming? He's dealing with the calf thing of late. I actually thought LeBron looked better last night than he had at any point this year in terms of aggression, confidence, like some of the shot making. Like he looked like kind of 2015 LeBron, I thought at times, with the athleticism and the way that he was going at that Grizzlies defense. So there's going to be nights where he's a little more passive and the age shows up. So I understand, the appeal with LeBron, but yeah, in a points league especially, I think that's where Assar Thompson is going to have a little bit more value long term. That's where the lack of threes, the free throw percentage aren't going to hurt you. And Jalen Duren too. I mean, obviously rebounds matter in points leagues, and I think that's what I want. Jason Tatum is also the steadiest player in fantasy basketball, whereas
sure.
Miles. Well, I mean, LeBron, Miles Turner, and Kristaps Porzingis all missed a ton of time, right? So I think you have more upside with Thompson, Duren, and Tatum, and I also think you have a higher floor. So for me, that one's pretty easy.
I think if you're gonna get into the business of by himself and you bring in a star player, like you really try and what kind of player do you think you can get in return or complement of players if you trade Assar Thompson by himself?
That's a good question. I mean, it's so hard to say who might just be available. I mean, so you're saying
he's exciting right now. Like
right.
you do have to consider that he could be a.
Right.
We think he's steady, but that's also baked into his value in a trade. Is that somebody that's making a move on him doesn't think that they're getting fleeced, and so you can get a little bit more for him.
Yeah, I mean, are we talking like, do you target someone like a Pascal Siakam?
Yeah, and I mean, Siakam's coming off of another great game, and it seems like he's turned things around. But maybe somebody who was scared off by the early season struggles. I still feel like I'd rather have Assar Thompson, but that's sort of my point, is that the fact that that's where we are mentally with Assar Thompson means it might be a good sell high point.
Yeah, I think, in general, I want to target, guys who have that pedigree, who might be off to a slow start. You're obviously selling high on Assar Thompson. You're probably buying low on someone like Siakam. So yeah, I mean, I'm not saying for sure that Assar Thompson is going to fall off at any point. Like, who knows? And right now he's not an appealing player to trade, but certainly something that I would consider. Just given the fact that there would be kind of a buying frenzy on him. All right, what else?
What about my guy Paolo?
Sure. Yeah, I'm fine with that. I mean, I think Paolo's played fine. I think the fantasy ranking maybe doesn't quite reflect that. The 3-point shooting is going to be up and down, but that's somebody that I would rather have at this point, just for the relative security. We got a question here on Mark Williams. Thoughts on Mark Williams? Clifford is playing with his minutes too much. Do you think Miles Bridges impacts him when he's back? Yeah, the Miles Bridges question is huge. We should just address that in general. He can return as early as this Friday. That's the Hornets' next game, and all indications are that that's going to be the case. Steve Clifford even said, he's going to have a big role right away. They seem to be just kind of leaning headfirst into this. They play Friday and Saturday in a back-to-back, and it's tough to say right now because the Hornets have a ton of injuries. So we don't know if Terry Rozier, Gordon Hayward, Brandon Miller, any of those guys are going to be available on Friday. So we might not get like a perfect look at Miles Bridges' role right away. But in terms of Mark Williams specifically, it's like in a roundabout way, his role could be affected because if we're seeing more Miles Bridges at the 3 or the 4, maybe that means that we see more PJ Washington at the 5. So I think Miles Bridges, I think there's like 3 or 4 players on this roster who he can ultimately impact. What say you?
I wouldn't be so confident that Miles Bridges comes right back into the starting lineup. I think that's sort of where I'm at. He hasn't played basketball in a while, and Steve Clifford is a hard-nosed, old-school coach. You got to earn your minutes back with a guy like that, and I think that's part of the reason why it can be frustrating for fantasy managers, because you look at players that say, this guy's clearly better than that guy. I remember so vividly when he was coaching the Magic, it would drive Magic fans crazy because he would, rather than trying to get Mo Bamba up to speed, which in hindsight now, it turns out he was completely right about Bamba. But at the time, you thought this was a big with all this upside, and he kept playing Kem Birch over him. And it was maddening. But that's the kind of coach that he is. If you're not giving him production and you haven't earned your minutes, then you're not going to be on the floor. Miles Bridges has to earn his way back. So I wouldn't freak out about it. Even though he's going to make his way back, I don't think it's going to be that impactful right out of the gate. We're still talking about a player looking back at 3 games ago, 24 rebounds against the Washington Wizards. I mean, that's not the kind of guy you want to get away from too much.
No, not necessarily. I kind of wish I would have had more Mark Williams, honestly, given the start that he's been off to. I didn't really love what I saw last year. I thought he looked like a little slow, but he looks more athletic to me. He looks more confident early this season. And unfortunately, we got a question here from Ant. Nick Richards is somebody I've been streaming in a couple leagues over the last couple of weeks. I think he's somebody that maybe not dropped fully from the rotation, but I think we see his impact muted a little bit going forward as well. And Ant asked, if I have to drop one of these guys in a category league, would you drop Bismack, Biyombo, Nick Richards, or Goga Bitadze? The big three.
It doesn't get much bigger than that, if we're being honest. You're the Nick Richards guy, so I'll leave that one for you. Bismack's been playing some good basketball. I think I'm dropping Goga. I know our guy Ken Kreitz overspent for him, and on the fab, but Wendell Carter Jr. should be making his way back relatively soon, at least within the next couple of weeks. I just don't think Goga is going to give you that much more. And Mo Wagner, I think, has been playing so well. I wouldn't be surprised if they made that switch as well in the starting lineup.
Yeah, I've never been a huge Goga guy. I know some of the per minute numbers look okay going back to his days in Indiana when it felt like he was like a game time call for every single game that he ever played. Wendell Carter's not going to be out that long. So I never really was all in on Bitadze. It's not like we're looking at like a 4-month injury here.
I think he fooled people with the block shots in that first game right out of the gate. That's not really who he is.
Yeah, exactly. It was kind of the perfect scenario to force people to overspend on him in fab. All right, we got a couple messages to pass along from some of our sponsors. If I can actually locate the reads here, Brandon, I
believe in you.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna have to fold my screen down. This is embarrassing. We got too many monitors going here, but we got 3 great sponsors.
You got a nice look at that Spalding notepad, though. That was nice.
Very cool. Got that from the NBA Combine one year. We always love the NBA supporting us. Underdog Fantasy, Brandon, is the #1 platform for best ball and DFS player pick'em contests. If you have not tried Underdog yet, new users receive a first-time deposit bonus up to $100 and a free 6-month subscription to RotoWire with promo code RWNBA. That's RWNBA. Go to UnderdogFantasy.com or download the Underdog app today and use that promo code RWNBA to get a free RotoWire subscription and deposit bonus. We're also brought to you by Vivid Seats. The NBA season's underway. In behalf of our friends at Vivid Seats, let's get one thing clear. Nothing beats seeing your favorite team crush it on the court to the sound of thousands of screaming fans. Every dunk, dribble, and heart-pounding play of your favorite team, live and in person. And because Vivid Seats is the only company where you can earn rewards on every purchase, you can score amazing deals and unrivaled rewards all season long. Plus, with their 100% buyer guarantee, you can be sure your ticket will be as legit as your love for the game. Go to vividseats.com or download their app today. Use the promo code ROTOWIRE for $20 off your first $200 purchase. That's ROTOWIRE, ROTOWIRE, for $20 off your first $200 ticket purchase. Download the app or visit vividseats.com. Vivid Seats, experience it live. All right, what else we got from last night, Brandon? I would love to say that we could do like 20 minutes on the Wembanyama versus Chet showdown.
Yeah.
It was anything but. Not only did OKC run away with the game, they win by 36. It was really never all that competitive. Got out of hand in the third quarter. But props to our guy, Alex Barutha, on the RotoWire NBA show on SiriusXM NBA radio last night. He handed out a Chet Holmgren to outscore Victor Wembanyama bet at 2-1. And it didn't really cash in the way that we thought. Chet Holmgren, 9 points on 3 of 10 shooting. Victor Wembanyama, 8 points on 4 of 15.
Hey, a win is a win. That was. I've noticed there have been a lot of disappointing moments, really, ever since we get that whiff of the phenom version of Victor Wembanyama when he went up against Kevin Durant, and it made all the headlines, and he had that monster stat line. We've seen Wembanyama in some other spots in primetime situations with the spotlight on him, and he hasn't really shown up. So I think I'm officially out of the business of the Spurs being appointment television, and Wembanyama can kind of just become part of my league pass rotation with everybody else. There were better options last night, to say the least.
Yeah, it was too good to be true, and this is something that's going to happen with the Spurs, right? I mean, they've been blown out a ton of times already, and Wembanyama still has like 3 wow plays every night, even on what felt like a disaster night for him. He had a ton of 14 rebounds. He had like 6 in the first couple of minutes because there were so many missed shots here. But unfortunately, not too many takeaways from that game specifically. Let's get back to the chat here. We got some good questions coming in. Is Spencer Dinwiddie a must roster? This is interesting, Brandon, because on Monday we had people asking us, is he a must drop?
Right. And then he goes off against the Magic last night, and you want to, Now you want to throw him onto the roster. I think that was more of an outlier than a norm sort of performance. How much of that do you think was because of the time that Ben Simmons is missing? And not that Ben Simmons does a lot of scoring, but he does handle the ball quite a bit.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, and what had concerned me with Dinwiddie prior to last night was that he had not put up good numbers with Ben Simmons out. And you're thinking, all right, I mean, if you're only giving us like 3.5 assists per game without Ben Simmons, like what is that going to look like when he's back? And then of course, he goes for 29, 9, and 5 last night with 5 threes. But that's also kind of how it works with Dinwiddie, right? Like there's for every 29 and 9 game, there's like 3, 12, and 3 games in there.
I feel like the guy scores 12 almost every night. And Cam Thomas was out last night too, so that's something to keep in mind for Brooklyn. I don't think he's a must-roster player.
I roster him if you're in like a 10 or a 12 team league. It becomes a little dicier. In a 12 teamer, I still want him on my roster. I want him as an option. But yeah, I would say he's a must roster for me. He's not a must start. I don't think you're going to, like, if you're in a league with 4 or 5 bench spots, do you really have like 5 players around your league that are significantly better than Dinwiddie? And I also don't know if Ben Simmons is coming back anytime soon. Like this, when we're talking about nerve irritation for a guy who's had a ton of back issues, I don't think this is like a 2-game injury.
Yeah, only Ben Simmons gets nerve irritation. You don't see that from anybody else. It's a very Ben Simmons injury.
It really is. Yeah, it really is. All right, what else?
By the way, can I just mention, until further notice, if you bet the NBA, can you please just bet Pacers overs and don't overthink this? I mean, this team is captain consistency. They've played 11 games so far, Nick. Their overs are 10-1. I mean, it's the biggest lock every night they play. That's just they've done a really good job of making teams play the style of basketball that they want to play, and they don't always win, but they're one of those teams. You talk about teams that we were wrong about. The Indiana Pacers are one of them. I thought they'd be a lot worse than this. This is a real basketball team, and they're controlling pace every time they take the floor.
They had their best win of the year last night against the 76ers. And that was a game where you kept waiting for Philly to take control and kind of win this one late. Like, Tyrese Maxey had a huge crossover step back 3 that tied it late. And you're like, all right, this might be the momentum swing that finally gives Philly this game. But Tyrese Halliburton, man, is just so good. The lack of turnovers, these last couple of games, he's just been unbelievable. 33, 15, and 7 last night. He's always good for a couple of steals. Gave you a block last night. 7 of 12 from beyond the arc. I didn't even think Indy played all that well. It's not like they shot the lights out from 3 to get to 132. It was a lot of Halliburton. TJ McConnell gave them some good minutes off the bench, and then we saw the best game maybe of his career from Obi Toppin. 27 points, 6 boards on 12 of 15 shooting.
I think Tyrese Halliburton is right now at least in the conversation for MVP, which is not anywhere that we would have thought he'd be, just based on how where we thought the Pacers were going to be coming into the season. But he's on that short list. I don't think he's necessarily at Jokic levels, but he's not far behind with the way this team's performing right now. And you're right, that win should start to put them on a national radar. This is a really good team, and they're a lot of fun to watch. And for fantasy purposes, they're fantastic. Yeah,
they're so much fun to watch. I mean, they're a completely different team with Halliburton. We saw it last year too, right? I mean, they were like a couple games over 500 with him when he was not out there. They have nothing offensively, and I think the lack of creation other than Halliburton kind of makes them so dependent on him. But for fantasy, that's probably a good thing as long as he can stay healthy. Question about the Clippers. What's the rest of season outlook on the Clips? If you had to take a guess, Paul George does not look too affected by the Harden trade, though Kawhi is kind of struggling. Is this a buy low opportunity on Kawhi Leonard? And our question asker here posits, could Assar Thompson get it done for Kawhi Leonard? Is that a deal you'd consider?
Ooh. Yeah, see, this is exactly what I'm talking about with Assar Thompson. That I do think that the Kawhi Leonard owner would make that trade. And if you're confident that he can put together a Kawhi Leonard type season and not miss too much time, then you're going to end up on the winning end of that. But there's reason for pessimism right now. James Harden has wrecked the chemistry for this basketball team, and I can't trust that Kawhi Leonard is going to be somebody that's going to play more than 60 games in the season. So even though it's probably the sharper side to get Kawhi Leonard on your roster. I'm not sure I'd be willing to make that move right now.
I'm not really concerned about Kawhi's recent struggles. There's been some bad signs. There's some audio the other night of him like screaming at Zubac mid game, which like it's Kawhi Leonard. That's alarming because Kawhi Leonard doesn't talk to anybody, let alone shout at his own teammates. I don't think I don't know that he was necessarily on board with the Harden thing. He's always been a passive personality, but it doesn't look like he loves how the Clippers are playing. He's been under 20 points in 3 of the last 4 games, actually 4 of the last 5 since James Harden joined the mix. So there is reason for concern. And Paul George, if you watch this team, certainly last night, like he looks like the alpha, right? Like he looks like the guy who, everything's running through him. He's far more aggressive. He was the guy taking and mostly missing the big shots last night. So I understand the concern with Kawhi. The thing with me is like, even if Kawhi was playing well, you're just waiting for the injury, right? You're waiting for that knee to act up. And all of a sudden he's in and out and he's missing back-to-backs. And we just go through this with Kawhi every year. But I think the more interesting part of this is, would you trade Assar Thompson for him? Is it worth that risk?
I don't think I would. And I think right now, and this isn't just based off of 1 or 2 games. This is now, we're going on a few weeks of the NBA season. Assar Thompson statistically has been the better defensive player, which is crazy to say because Kawhi Leonard, as far as an on-ball defender, is one of the world's best. But the statistics just aren't there when you compare it to what Assar Thompson is giving you. It just looks so sustainable. What I'm watching from Thompson does not feel fluky. He looks like he belongs, and that's just not a guy that you're going to have to blow me away in a trade. Name-wise, you win with Kawhi Leonard, but I don't think it would pay off in the end, and I think you could do better.
Yeah, I would try to do better. I don't hate trying to get Kawhi just because you said name-wise, it's like, Kawhi, if he plays even 60 games, it's probably worth it. He probably out produces Assar Thompson. But yeah, I would go for someone who's got a little bit more security, not in terms of stat upside, but in terms of games played upside. I want somebody who I feel better about getting to 70 or even, 72, 75 games. Free key.
Yeah, you want to buy low. I feel like that's buying high on Kawhi Leonard. Right. If you make that kind of move, he would be considered a buy low candidate. So see if you can get him on the cheap.
Free key, who we always appreciate jumping in the stream. He asks, "What's the stream for the Warriors with Steph Curry out and Draymond likely suspended?" Draymond I think is probably getting a couple of games here. These suspensions always come in lighter than you'd expect as far as like putting a player in a chokehold goes. Like I don't think Draymond's getting like.
Do we have precedent for that?
Yeah, well, it is Draymond. So, if they take into account, his history, maybe we see a few more games, but I would guess 2-3 games for Draymond. And
I was going to say earlier, 5 max. Okay. 5 would be the max.
And what we said earlier with Steph, I think they're going to take him game to game. Would not be surprised, if this ends up being more of a week to week thing when you're talking about a knee sprain. We'll see. I mean, Clay could get a game or 2 as well. So there's going to be opportunity if you're in daily lineup leagues. I mean, if you have the opportunity to add Brandin Podziemski, is this something that you would consider for the rest of the week? Warriors play tomorrow. Warriors play tomorrow and Saturday against OKC.
I would do it, but don't obviously keep your expectations at a proper level. I think in terms of who we would expect to see, I mean, Moses Moody at some point, this is your time to shine, man. Like if you're not going to pop off here, then I just don't think it's going to happen for you. So it should be Moses Moody. But yeah, I mean, I would take a shot on Podziemski.
I mean, based on what we saw last night, I do think there's going to be like a serious regression. Like, I don't know how closely you were watching that game, Brandon. I had that one on one of the TVs, and some of these shots were, kind of miracle type of plays. He had a high, floater and one over Rudy Gobert that is just like, all right, I'd like to see you make that one again. Yeah. Like we said, the banked in 3 to end the third quarter. Like there was a little bit of kind of magic behind that game. So I don't think you can just expect Podziemski to give you 20 plus every night. In terms of streamers, it's like, I guess the next most obvious name would be Andrew Wiggins, but that's a pretty tough one to stomach right now. I wouldn't be rushing to grab him. Dario Saric had 21 last night. He took 11 threes, got to the line 6 times. He had some rebounds, gave you a couple steals. So, if I think he'd be the kind of obvious replacement for Draymond Green. Like if you're looking to specifically replace him in a daily lineup league for the next 2 games, maybe just grab Dario Saric. He's probably going to play 30 minutes and just hope for the best.
Yeah, he seems to be the go-to starter in this sort of situation. But in terms of how closely I watch the game, if it starts at 10 o'clock at night, I'm watching the highlights and reading the box score. 10 o'clock Eastern time, I have a 4-year-old, and he does not care that I want to stay up and watch NBA games.
Good question here from one of our pals. What about Jonathan Kuminga? Asked Kenneth. We didn't touch on Kuminga. I love the idea of Kuminga, and last night should have been a big opportunity. He only played 16 minutes, which was
Yep.
kind of strange with no Clay, no Steph, no Draymond. Prior to that, he'd had a decent run. He scored double digits in 7 straight games. But even in what have been considered his better games this year, like he's not rebounding at all. He has 5 assists total in his last 8 games. The defensive numbers haven't really been there. He is getting to the line a bunch, and he's shooting almost 80%. So there is that, but I don't have a ton of interest in him. Like even when he plays well, it feels like it's kind of just scoring.
Yeah, he's still such a raw player, and you can see just based on the opportunities that he should be given, just based on his draft status. You're talking about a guy that was taken inside of the top 10 just 2 years ago. Steve Kerr doesn't trust him, and he still has not refined his game enough. Moses Moody is dealing with something similar. The only reason why I say I trust Moody a little bit more is because he could shoot. He can shoot from the outside, and that's not part of Jonathan Kuminga's game. So I just don't think Kuminga really fits into the flow of the offense all that well. It's a little bit square peg, round hole for me.
Yep. I feel the same way there. All right, we got a message from Rival Fantasy. LeBron versus Jordan, Magic versus Bird, Barkley versus McHale, Jade McDaniels versus Klay Thompson. Basketball is synonymous with legendary player rivalries. They make the game more fun, and they give fans the storylines that raise the stakes every time those players meet on the court or come up in conversation. Now, every player matchup and head-to-head debate can be settled on Rival Fantasy. This NBA season, you can play challenges where you decide which NBA player will score more fantasy points in their next game. Play the Rival Fantasy in-house challenges or create your own and get a friend in the mix with customizable social challenges. Sign up at joinrival.com/rotowire right now, and you'll get a $200 deposit match. Get in on this now before we get too deep in the NBA season. That's joinrival.com/rotowire. It's time to step up to the challenge on Rival Fantasy. We will see you in the arena. All right. Nick Whalen and Brandon Kravitz here with you, taking some listener questions as we move through the pod. Derek Lively, rest of season outlook. And we have a second question here. Will Scoot redeem himself when he comes back? So let's start with Derek Lively, Brandon. Not somebody who I have rostered on a ton of teams. I know there was some preseason hype, and for the most part, he's looked pretty good. Like I watched him a lot at Duke last year. This is a guy who at one point was the number 1 overall player in his high school class, and I didn't love what I saw. I mean, he certainly didn't look the part of a number 1 overall recruit. Kind of more of an energy type of player. But right now, you're targeting him for the field goal percentage, which is up over 70%, and you're looking for the blocks. He has at least 1 block in all but 1 game this season. Ironically, last night against New Orleans was the first time he did not record a block. For the most part, though, it's been like 1 single block per game, which is still valuable. The rebounds have been a little bit more up and down. But where do you stand on Derek Lively? Is he a guy who is a sustainable starter, going to be playing 20 to 25 minutes most nights?
I think he is. This is exactly the kind of guy the Mavericks have been looking for years, and I think that's why you're seeing him produce right out of the gate. This is the type of player that they've been wanting to pair with Luka, somebody who can rim run, play some defense, and they want a big with athleticism because Luka's going to put guys like that in positions to succeed. They've been struggling to find that player. And I think Derek Lively, might, even though he's young, he's still the best version that they've had in years. What was it? JaVale McGee, I think. They had like spurts where they would find guys that could play that sort of role. But I think Derek Lively's game is more well-rounded than anything that they've utilized in Luka's short career.
So let's go to part 2 here. Will Scoot Henderson redeem himself when he comes back? To some degree, I think he will. I don't think it's going to be as bad as it was before the injury, but the last thing he needed was to miss a couple of weeks here and be dealing with an ankle. We'll see how long that lingers or when he's back in the lineup. Probably going to be at least another week, if not longer, until we see him. I don't think we're going to look back in March and Scoot Henderson is still averaging like 9 points and 4 assists and 4 turnovers per game. I think it's going to get better. The question is it better to the point where you're actually putting him in a fantasy lineup? I don't know, man. He's somebody I'd probably be willing to trade. Like, I think even if the numbers improve, he's going to be better in points leagues. He's going to be, I think some of those plays will be more translatable to like real life value as opposed to fantasy. Like even like the rookie guards who have like the best rookie guard seasons, they don't tend to rank that high in fantasy.
Yeah, his best days are in front of him, which is easy to say because he hasn't done anything yet. I am still going to hold on Scoot Henderson. I don't personally think you can trade him. You would get absolutely nothing in return because he's shown nothing. If you drafted him, you know what you were looking for. He hasn't shown a glimpse of it yet in NBA regular season action. It's going to come. At some point, he's going to put together a couple of games that absolutely wow you. You might just have to wait for it. So I don't think you can trade him unless he's a throw-in and add-on to a deal. He can't be the core of it. And I'm just personally not willing to throw him on the waiver wire. If you have to do it, I understand. But at this point in the season, you should be comfortable just keeping him on your bench.
Good question here from Supremacy. He asks, who do you think is going to be the Shea of this season? Someone who just smashes their ADP. Could it be Scotty Barnes? Could it be Tyrese Maxey? Could it be somebody else? Obviously, Barnes and Maxey are already.
Those are good options.
Yeah, they're in that conversation this season. And for reference, the ADP for SGA last year, it's kind of all over the place depending on where you look. ESPN, he was going considerably higher, but for the most part across like CBS, Yahoo, Underdog, he was going around pick like 30 to 35. So, we're talking about somebody who, was maybe drafted in the second, third, fourth round who could finish as a first round value. Yeah, I think Maxey's the most obvious one right now. And I think what he's doing is pretty sustainable. Now, if the Sixers were to trade for Zack LaVine or, bring in somebody of that caliber, maybe that changes things, that lowers his upside a little bit. But outside of those two, is there anybody else who comes to mind? I mean, Chet Holmgren ranks in the top 20 right now in 8-cat. I think he could be somebody.
Yeah, we've mentioned Assar Thompson a bunch of times. He's not going to give you the scoring upside that some of those other guys are that we've talked about, but I still think just overall fantasy value, he's somebody that's really impressed early on. I'm trying to find somebody else. I'm looking down the list of the rankings. Most of the guys that are performing were relatively expected to do so. So I think that you already nailed it there on the question. I think those are the guys that have the best opportunity. Unless there's somebody that's just going to come off the top rope out of nowhere, it looks like it's Tyrese Maxey, it's Scotty Barnes, and then in a different sort of way, Assar Thompson. Those seem to be the most pleasant surprises. And if we were to redraft today, their ADPs would be so much higher than they were going into draft season.
Yeah, it's tough to find somebody else who has like SGA level upside. I mean, you have to have such a solid stat profile, right? Like, and even Assar Thompson, it's like even in a best case, like he's
right.
Like the percentages are going to keep him down. He's only scoring 12 points per game. So it's like he has,
but his ADP was so ridiculously low. So it's based on relative to expectation coming in.
Yeah, no question. I mean, he could finish 80 spots ahead of his ADP. So for sure, I just, he doesn't have first round upside necessarily the rest of the way. Let's see. Who is droppable of this group? He's got to make room for Devin Booker joining his roster in a 9-cat league. We should mention, by the way, Devin Booker, Brad Beal, Kevin Durant, all three expected to do the unthinkable and play tonight against the Minnesota Timberwolves. So Yusuf needs to drop one of these three players: Dyson Daniels, Alec Burks, or KCP.
Well, I've already dropped KCP in a league, so I guess I would have to stay true to what I'm doing here on my end. I think Kentavious Caldwell-Pope would be my pick there. It's just not really filling up the stat sheet like he was early in the season.
Yeah, I mean, I see the name Alec Burks, and I'm just like, I don't know. I mean, every fantasy basketball player goes through the Alec Burks phase where he spends a couple of weeks on your roster, and it's been good of late. I just worry about the variations with this Pistons rotation. They're like Jaden Ivey played 20 minutes last night, still found a way for Burks to play 20 plus. Like I just like when Bogdanovich comes back, if Joe Harris, ever joins the rotation, like those are both guys who could kind of marginalize him. So yeah, it's tough. I mean, and Dyson Daniels, like I like the player a lot. I think he kind of got robbed of his rookie season, with the injury, didn't get to play all that much. You're basically targeting the steals and the assists with him. I think when CJ McCollum comes back, whenever that may be, and even Jose Alvarado is going to have a say in this rotation. Like I think then we could see Dyson Daniels take a step back. So frankly, I don't know that you're going to like have major regret dropping any of those guys.
Exactly.
With KCP, I kind of like holding him just because he plays a ton of minutes. He'll have those nights where he gets you like 4 or 5 threes, it gets you steals.
It just hasn't happened. This is a guy, I actually went and picked him up off the waiver wire a couple weeks ago, and he's done nothing. He had one 15-point game so far in about the last month of play. He's had 5 and 10 in his last 2 games. Hasn't made more than 3 threes at any point this month. And he doesn't give you anything else. That's his entire game. So if I'm not getting threes from Condavious Caldwell-Pope, I'm just not interested.
Fair enough. All right, let's hit a couple more, and then we'll be out of here. Is Ben Simmons a drop? This is a 14-team category league. Obviously the question asker cites the recent development with the nerve issue in the back, and I mean, I don't draft Ben Simmons anywhere. He's been on my do not draft list for a couple of years. This is just not something I've had to grapple with, but it's a fair question. And in a 14-team league, like if you have an IR spot, maybe you just throw him in there. I don't know. I don't see this turning out well. I don't think a month from now Ben Simmons is putting up 12 points, 9 rebounds, and 6 assists every single night. So what do you think?
My general rule of thumb when dropping a player is somebody else in my league immediately going to try and add them? Because if that's the case, then you're better off just trying to get a trade done, or you might be making a mistake. I don't think Ben Simmons is an immediate add, so I would say, yeah, you can drop him.
Yeah, I'm pretty comfortable with that. I don't think you're going to get burned, is the way I would put it. It's like, worst case scenario, he just kind of goes back to giving you like borderline top 100 production. Yeah. So if
this isn't going to come back. This isn't going to backfire on you.
No. I have Cam Johnson in my league. Should I pick up? So I guess the question is, should you pick up Cam Johnson? If he's available, yeah. I mean, unless you're in a super shallow league, I would pick up Cam Johnson. Trade question from Jose. Should I trade LeBron and Valanciunas for Barnes and Siakam in a 9-cat league? I say yes.
Yeah, I think I would rather have the Barnes and Siakam tandem.
Yeah, I mean, Barnes has been the best player of the 4 so far. You're buying low on Siakam. We talked earlier about LeBron and the injuries the last few years, and you always have to worry about that. And Valanciunas is fine, but ultimately, I think there's more upside with the 2 Raptors guys.
Yeah, and you're buying low on Siakam, but also Siakam with signs of life. That was my concern about a week ago when we had this conversation, was that we just hadn't seen anything. And so you were wondering if it had all gone away or if they were going to move off of him. But Scotty Barnes, he came back down to earth a little bit, but he's still filling up the stat sheet. And now you're seeing Siakam really start to score the ball well. So I like what I'm seeing from both those guys.
All right. Another good question here on Zack LaVine, who was at the Champions Classic last night, hanging out with Rich Paul, just doing the typical like post trade request. I'm out there. Everybody wants to be public here. If LaVine gets traded, will his fantasy outlook be better than it is on the Bulls? For example, what if he went to the Lakers or the Heat or the Sixers? In terms of team context, I would say yes. I mean, the Bulls are dead last in pace. They're just a terrible offensive team. LaVine just kind of looks like he's stuck in the mud. So I think in terms of like a just pure basketball situation, like almost any team would be an upgrade. But obviously he goes from kind of the co-number 1 in Chicago to, if he goes to the Lakers, he's the number 3 option. If he goes to the Heat, kind of number 2-ish, I guess, depending on how you value Bam.
Yeah.
The Sixers to me, I mean, it would be fun. Like I get it.
It would wreck Tyrese Maxey's value.
I know. I don't want him to go to Philly because I think that's going to throw cold water on Maxey.
Yeah, I read a report yesterday. I don't know if it was a report or a rumor, so excuse me there, but it was from a Philly beat writer that said Philadelphia is unlikely to make this move because they're really happy with the depth that they have. So I would be surprised if the Sixers made a trade like this when they already have somebody that plays that sort of a role in their offense. And yeah, they're hot right now, so they don't have any sort of impetus to make a trade like this. I think it's the Heat, and in terms of in real life, it would help them a lot. Yep. And in fantasy, I think in terms of those 3 options, it would be the best for Zack LaVine because he wouldn't be the number 3 guy or in the shadows of Joel Embiid. He would be the number 2 to Jimmy Butler in that offense and would basically be like a high definition version of what Tyler Hero is giving you. So I love that for fantasy and reality.
Reality-wise,
Hero would be on the way to Chicago. He would be part of that trade, guaranteed.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, is LaVine that big of an upgrade over Hero?
Yes, I think he is. Okay. Tyler Hero's not a true 3-level scorer. Zack LaVine is. I was looking at some of his numbers yesterday. Catch and shoot 42% from 3-point range, and he can get to the basket. And he's a better defender than Tyler Hero, which you can say about almost anybody.
Mhm.
I think he is. And now he's also way more expensive. But if you're just looking at it from a basketball lens, I think Zack LaVine is a pretty significant upgrade.
I think that's fair. Trade question here from Amin. Franz and Lopez for Garland and Looney. Which side would you rather have?
I would much rather have Franz and Brook Lopez.
I think I would do the same. Yeah, Lopez has been off to somewhat of a slow start, but I mean, Looney ranks behind him so far. You're kind of just targeting the rebounds with Looney. So to me, it comes down to who would you rather have between Garland and Franz. And Garland has been the better player in fantasy so far. But I think the upgrade of Lopez over Looney to me would slightly push me in favor of the Franz and Lopez side. But this is a fair deal. It's a fair deal. I mean, I like Darius Garland, and I think he's probably going to rank higher than he currently does, which is like mid-50s. He probably pushes into the 30s or 40s at least. So fair question. It's a points league if that matters.
Yeah, and Cleveland has not been playing all that well. I would imagine that tonight we'd see an upgraded stat line from Darius Garland. They're playing the Portland Trailblazers. That tends to be a nice slump buster situation. But Franz, we talked about it earlier. This is steady Eddie in fantasy, so you need those guys on your roster. You know exactly what you're going to get, and I think the variety of production you're getting from Brook Lopez far outweighs that of Kevon Looney.
Great question here from Ant. MMA fight. Who do you put your money on, Draymond or Gobert?
I think Gobert's just a little bit too lanky and awkward. Like, I think he could be caught out of position pretty easily. Draymond Green is as feisty as it gets. So just based on attitude, and I worry about the right hook of Gobert taking too long to meet its mark. I think I'd go with Draymond, and he'd be a dirty fighter too.
Oh yeah, well, see, I don't watch MMA. That's the bottom of the barrel for me in terms of sports that I care about. So I don't know like really what the rules are. If the rules are pretty relaxed, then absolutely Draymond. Like, are you allowed to use weapons? Are you allowed to choke people out? Whatever the case,
you can choke people out, but you can't use a weapon.
Yeah, I actually think Gobert is probably tougher than he gets credit for. I think he's kind of been dragged through the mud in a lot of ways. I think he put up a fight. He's got the length. He's got the reach. But no, Draymond might be number one in the league, right? I mean, is James Johnson still in the NBA? If he's not, like, you don't want to be matched up with Draymond. I thought that's like fighting a grizzly bear, man. He's got the girth. He's got the aggression.
I don't know. I think I would take Jay Crowder over anybody.
Well, Jay Crowder's hurt, so he, right now he's out of the equation. We'll have to wait on his prize fight.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Another good would you rather here. I assume it's a trade question, but we'll just say, would you rather roster Jimmy Butler and Mark Williams or Paul George and Alperen Sengun going forward? 9-category league.
Ooh, like both sides here, so this is not easy. But I think I like Paul George a little bit more than Jimmy Butler.
Yeah.
And I think right now Mark Williams is outplaying Sengun, but I think I'd rather have Paul George and Alperen Sengun.
Yep, me too. You still worry a little bit about the sustainability of Paul George just with how bad the Clippers have looked with Harden, but it hasn't affected him so far. And to me, like Sengun versus Mark Williams, that is a very clear mark in favor of Sengun. And the turnovers haven't really been that bad for him. Like, I know that's been an issue. He's been a high turnover player per minute in the past. He's only at like 2 per game right now. So the 9-category thing is just not that big of a deal for me. So yeah, I would lean George and Sengun. We got an all caps question here. Would you trade Reeves for Rozier?
No, I would not. I'd rather have Austin Reeves. I know we haven't quite seen it all put together yet, but better days are ahead for Austin Reeves.
Towns for Harden and Nurkic. Our friend Z says he received this offer. What do you think?
No, I'm holding on to Cat in that situation.
Yeah. I like James Harden is still a great.
You have way too much faith in James Harden still.
Well, I mean, I don't think James Harden is going to win the Clippers the title here. I'm not worried about that, but like it feels like he's played like it's been a disaster, right? He's played 5 games, they've lost all 5, they look clunky, and yet he's still like 45th in fantasy. Like he's beating his ADP as far as where he was going right at the end of draft season, and he's averaging 15 points, 4 rebounds, 4 assists. Like he's still a cheat. Like he hasn't missed a free throw. He's still a cheat code there. The field goal percentage is good. He's giving you 2 threes a game. Like I actually think this is a pretty fair question. I would rather have Towns. The Nurkic thing to me is like, it's almost more like Towns or Harden straight up, including Nurkic in there. Like if you're light at center and like you need a center eligible player, I actually think this is an okay deal to do because Harden doesn't really miss time for the most part. He's been very, very durable. And he's always been a better fantasy player than he is a real life player, which is saying a lot. He's a pretty good real life player. So I actually think this is one you have to think about. To me, it just comes down to how much help do you need at the center spot. All right, we'll hit 2 or 3 more and then be out of here. Would you trade Cade Cunningham for Kawhi in a 9-category league?
No, I'd rather have Cade Cunningham.
I think I'd rather have Cade as well. I mean, the thing is, he's turning the ball over a ton. So like, it's kind of a false number here, but he ranks outside the top 200 in 9-cat because of the 5 turnovers per game combined with the 40% from the field. So I understand it. Kawhi ranks like 170 spots ahead of him right now. He's only turning the ball over 1.7 times per game. Obviously, the percentages are better. If you're somebody who's willing to take the risk on Kawhi just, playing 50 games, then yeah, this makes sense. Like per game in a 9-category league, Kawhi's better. I would just rather have the guy that I think could play 75 games versus the guy who could play 55.
Yeah, and I still think there are better days ahead for Cade Cunningham. We haven't really seen him put it all together this year. Mm-hmm. He's an ascending player. Kawhi is descending at the moment, and just don't think he's filling up the stat sheet like we're used to seeing. So, maybe egg on my face in the future for doubting Kawhi, but I've been pretty low on him over the last hour of this pod.
I have Skylar Mays, Jeremy Grant, and DeAndre Ayton, and Bilal Coulibaly. Are any of them worth dropping for? It says Cam Thompson. I assume it's Cam Thomas, or
I would think Cam Thomas. I think it would be Cam Thomas. That feels like a Thomas autocorrect.
Yeah. Look, I'm not really that big on Coulibaly fantasy wise. I know he's, we've seen some flashes. I still think he's like just wildly raw, like one of the rawest prospects that we've ever seen drafted in the lottery. You'll get some rebounds, you get some defensive numbers. He's got 7 steals over the last 2 games. So that's ultimately what you're chasing. But, he's going to be like a 50% guy at the free throw line. I think the percentages are going to be all over the place. The 3-point shooting's actually been pretty decent so far, but we'll see where that goes in the long term. Coulibaly to me is somebody who's, if you have the roster spot, kind of a fun guy to have. I'm not really high on him. And if it's Cam Johnson, I'd rather have him than Coulibaly, no question. If it's Cam Thomas, that becomes maybe a little more complicated.
I'm just wondering why you have so many Blazers on your team. I think we need to share the wealth here.
Yeah.
Right. Skylar Mays has looked really good, by the way.
Yes, he has. And I think as long as Brogdon and Scoot are out, that's going to continue. We're obviously going to be a few more weeks without Anthony Simons as well. All right, 2 more. Then we're cutting it off. I got a trade proposal. Dennis Schroeder for Jordan Poole in a 14-team category league.
Yes. Yeah, I think I'd rather have Dennis Schroeder at this point. I am all the way out on Jordan Poole.
I think that's fair, man. I mean, Schroeder ranks 85th right now, 32 minutes a game. Significantly more efficient than Jordan Poole. He was playing more minutes consistently. Obviously, a better producer of assists. He's giving you a steal per game. I don't think that really changes. Barring something unforeseen with Toronto, like a big roster shakeup where they bring in a better point guard, which I don't see that being the case. Like, I think they're pretty content with Scotty Barnes and Dennis Schroeder doing the ball handling.
Yeah, he's found a very clear role in that offense, and Jordan Poole is lost right now, and I don't see that situation improving anytime soon. So give me the proven commodity over somebody who looks to be circling the drain.
Mm-hmm. All right, this is a good one to end on. What do we expect from Shaden Sharp? Will he remain in this spot after they are healthy as a team? I love Shaden Sharp, one of my favorite players to watch, just a freak athlete, one of the smoothest athletes in the NBA. He's been on a nice run of late. He's played 40-plus minutes now in 6 straight games. He's averaging 42 minutes per game over the last 6, 20 points, 5 rebounds, 4 assists, and a steal. High volume 3-point shooter. It tends to give you 2 or 3 per game there. It's just like he's not going to play 40-plus minutes, right? Like we have to be realistic about that first and foremost. I still think he's a big part of this rotation, but you can't really underestimate, how much production and how many minutes they're missing right now with Brogdon, who was playing pretty well. Simons, who's going to be a 35 to 38 minute guy when he's healthy, and then Scoot Henderson, who it's ultimately a rebuilding year for Portland. Like they're going to give him opportunities. They want to develop him. So I still like Shaden Sharp. I still think he'll be rosterable, but no, I don't think his current production, if we isolate these last 6 games, I don't see him being a 25-4 guy the rest of the way. I think you got to expect some regression there.
Yeah, production might take a dip, but I think the efficiency could be there. They're not going to get away from Shaden Sharp. He is part of the rebuilding process for the Portland Trailblazers. So even with those guys coming back, he'll always have a role this season, just based on where they are in their rebuild. So he's somebody I'm really excited about. And there is no certainty especially when you talk about teams that have no interest in winning basketball games. There's no certainty that good players return to the lineup, and Portland is maybe at the top of that list right now.
All right, guys, we got to cut it off here. Still getting some good questions in the chat. We apologize for not hitting the more recent ones, but we will be doing this every Wednesday at 10:30 a.m. Eastern. So, if that's a good time for you, hop in. We're happy to answer all your questions. You can find the archive version of this on our YouTube channel. You can always find us on the RotoWire NBA Twitter account as well. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel. That is huge for us as we try to grow this thing. I also do this basically the same pod with Alex Barutha on Monday afternoons. If you got questions there, we'll have Rick Kamla and Steve, Dr. A. Alexander coming at you guys tomorrow morning. And then Ken, Shannon, and Alex doing their waiver wire show on Fridays. So Monday through Friday, you can find this podcast on our YouTube channel, find it on our socials, and you can listen to it in traditional podcast form as well, wherever you get your podcasts. So for Brandon Kravitz, I'm Nick Whalen. We thank all you guys for listening. We'll be back next Wednesday.